Well, thank you, Mark. Well, next I'd like to welcome Katie Matthews. Katie is a mom of two, the director of a special needs ministry called Bethany Blessing, and the Banquet Network's executive director. Katie is passionate about bringing the gospel to families with special needs and seeks to train other church members on how to minister to family. Katie will be talking today with us about opening our eyes to invisible disabilities. Welcome, Katie.
We all have defining moments in our lives. They're the moments that have forever shaped us and changed us. And when we look back on those days, we can see a clear before and after. Maybe for you, that was the day you got married. Maybe it was the birth of your child. Or for many of us in this room or watching online, maybe it was the day that we heard about the diagnosis. For me, meeting my son Thomas as his second grade teacher for the first time was a clear defining moment. When I look back, there's a before and an after. Finalizing my son's adoption, defining moment in my life, clear before and after. And the first time my son, at 8 years old, attempted suicide, defining moment in my life. There is a clear before and after. Again, my name is Katie, and I get to be the mom of a beautiful young man named Thomas, who has several invisible disabilities, and some of which cause him to display self-injurious behaviors. In fact, my family represents a lot of invisible disabilities. I myself have type 1 diabetes. So if you hear any weird beeping, it's my insulin pump. It's been going off all day. Recently, a friend asked, did I leave the refrigerator open? Because that's what she thought it is. It's not a pager. It's not the refrigerator. It's my insulin pump. But I have type 1 diabetes, Lyme's disease, fibromyalgia, POTS, anxiety, ADHD, and PTSD. In fact, all 4 family members in my home have PTSD. You'll see my beautiful family there. I'm not biased at all. These 4 members have PTSD. My son Thomas, although we don't share the same blood and DNA, we do share the diagnosis of PTSD, ADHD, and anxiety. Thomas also has some other invisible disabilities, something called reactive attachment disorder. He has ADHD as well, as I mentioned, specific learning disabilities, fetal alcohol syndrome, conduct disorder. And he was born addicted to heroin and cocaine, which greatly impacts the way his brain functions. My family likes to joke that the Matthews residence makes up approximately 1/3 of the DSM-5. Joking aside, I do eat, sleep, and breathe anything related to disability. The Lord has put a clear passion and calling on my heart. And so the information you guys are going to hear for the next 10 minutes or so is going to drastically change your life. I'm lying, it's not going to drastically change your life. But I do hope that I have your attention and that I hope that I have your attention. I do hope that you would rethink the word disability in the context of your church, specifically when thinking about invisible disabilities. But now that I've officially lied in the house of the Lord, I would like to tell you a little bit more about myself. Again, I get to be Thomas's mom. I also get to be mom to that beautiful young lady up there named Jade. This summer, we will celebrate her 2-year anniversary of adoption. I'm also a pastor's wife, so I know better than to lie in the house of the Lord. And I get to be an art teacher for middle schoolers and high schoolers with learning differences. In my spare time, I like to catch up on all the laundry that I failed to do during the week and drink excessive amounts of coffee. Where are my special needs moms at? Also, if you haven't noticed, trauma humor is my coping mechanism. I purposely took off my glasses so I couldn't see your faces to know whether or not you thought this was funny. I met my son Thomas when I was a special educator He was in second grade, and I heard the Lord say, "You're going to be this kid's mom." And anyone who knew my son at the time knew that this was insane. My son had bounced between, we were his eighth home. From age 5 to 7, he bounced between 7 other homes. At school, Thomas would self-harm. He would bite himself and others, scratch himself. He would run away. He would get restrained almost daily. He would hide under the tables and cry. He would then flip that said table. Nothing seemed to work. Therapy, tough love, behavior charts, reward systems, medications, nothing seemed to work. So my husband and I voluntarily went to the social workers and said, "Hey, we want to be this kid's parents. And by the way, we're only 24. They looked at us like we were a little crazy, and indeed we were. But you see, I've seen God do even crazier things in my son's life. Should have never even have gotten to meet my son. I quit working at the school about a month before my son started going there. I was a contractor with no benefits, very low pay, and I would frequently get injured on the job. So although I loved that job, my husband and I decided I needed to quit. But a few short weeks later, I got a phone call saying that unexpected budget money had fallen into the lap of my school. And if you work in the school system, you know there is no such thing as extra budget money. It fallen into the lap of my school, and they had decided to create a full-time position for me with benefits. So, long story short, the day I walked back into Hammond Elementary School was the day I met Thomas, the new second grader in the life skills program that was in foster care and will one day be my son. And if I told you all the mountains that the Lord had to move in my son's life for us to be able to do that, I would be kicked off the stage because I would need several hours. So fast forward 2 years later, and we're sitting in the Baltimore City courtroom, finally finalizing the adoption. And my son asks the judge, "Can I sing a song?" And the judge goes, "This has never happened before, but sure." And I was going to show you that video, but I didn't want to be any more of an emotional wreck up here, so I will spare you that. But let me just tell you that there was not a dry eye in the courtroom that day. And that's the power that Thomas has. That's the power that the Lord displays through him, not in spite of his disabilities, but because of them. And you may know the text. In I should be tapping through these. My apologies. In John 9, it says, "As he passed by, he saw a man blind from birth, and his disciples asked him, 'Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he may be born blind?' And Jesus answered, 'It was not him nor his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him.'" And I know a lot of you in this room know this, but the Lord works through people with disabilities. In the Banquet Network staff, we believe that the church itself is disabled when it doesn't include people with disabilities. And that includes disabilities that we cannot see. Because my son doesn't look disabled, he frequently doesn't receive the same grace as others. And I know that we all know that disability doesn't discriminate based on age or color or gender, wealth, that it impacts everyone, even those that don't look like it. But if you were to ask the average person what they think about when the word disability comes to mind, they might say something like the person in the wheelchair, or someone who has a physical disability, or they might think of the child with autism. But rarely do we think about the people that make up me. Rarely do we think about the people that make up my son, the ones that have the invisible disabilities, PTSD, ADHD. What about the person with dementia? Are we considering these people when making decisions about our churches? And my son doesn't just fall between the cracks in public and in school, it's also at church. Um, you see, my son has also learned to act and look a certain way. He's learned to mirror behaviors, and he's learned how to script conversations, because when my son was in foster care, that's the exact thing that kept him alive. So from age 5 to 7, bouncing from house to house, he learned that if I don't act a certain way or don't say certain things, then just maybe this family will keep me around for a little bit longer. But the problem is, as with most disabilities, you can't act a way that you're not wired to act. And sure, through therapy and hard work, we can make changes, but a little boy can only pretend to not be fidgety and anxious for so long before it comes out. And that's when they send you packing to the next house. It's why so many kids can keep it together at church or at school, maybe for a little bit. And as soon as they come home, they unwind because it's hard to act like someone you're not. And I know that because I've masked ADHD for almost 31 years of my life. So, simply put, people with invisible disabilities such as ADHD, anxiety, attachment disorders, PTSD, even autism that manifests in more covert ways, we don't receive the same grace and kindness as those that have visible disabilities. And this isn't to weigh the two or to put visible disabilities lower than. It's just a fact that we state. And I'll give you an example. Families like mine struggle a lot with invisible disabilities. And a lot of these from my family have come from the church. Sorry, I skipped that one. He doesn't look like he has disabilities. Is it really that bad? It's just a face. He's going to grow out of it. You're young parents, and with a little more structure and consequences, it won't be so bad. And my absolute favorite, well, have you tried spanking? This is my church. These are things that have come from my church. And I don't say that to shame my church. I love my church so much. But I say that to be vulnerable so that you guys know that even at my church, where my husband is the pastor and I'm on staff and this is our heart, we still get it wrong sometimes, and our people still get it wrong sometimes. And I know that people aren't always trying to hurt my family's feelings by saying these things, but sometimes they are directly pointed. Because my son's behaviors look a lot more like bad parenting than they look like a manifestation of a disability. I mean, think about it. When the 4-year-old throws a toy that has Down syndrome, we know they shouldn't, but it's kind of cute. But when my 13-year-old African American son throws the toy, because he's having a traumatic flashback and he can't verbalize that, it looks a whole lot more like violent and aggressive behavior than it does his PTSD. The US Department of Justice did a report and it found, sorry, I'm awful at this. That's a cool thing that we've all seen on shirts, but anyways. The US Department of Justice did a report and it found that 40% of jail inmates reported having at least one disability. Most of them had more, and most of them were invisible. And I couldn't find any sort of correlation or data about the church in this, but I can't help but wonder, what would this number look like? What would this number look like if the church wrapped around families like mine and tried to better support them instead of just sitting in our ignorance because we don't know? Instead of saying things like, "It doesn't look like he has a disability. Is it really that bad? It's just a phase, and you're young parents." Another study done concluded that the children that were most likely to be excluded from the church were those with invisible disabilities. A lot of these stats can also be found in Lamar Hardwick's book, Disability and the Church. If you haven't bought that yet, you should. And he did not pay me to say that. I'm just a big supporter of his book and these stats. So you see these numbers up here. You are, and I can't see because I took my glasses off so I couldn't see you guys, 84% chance of not attending church if you have ASD. 70% due to brain injury, 19 due to ADHD, 36 learning disability, 45 due to anxiety, 55 due to conduct disorder, and 73% chance of not attending church if you have depression. Those last 5 stats highlighted represent my family. That means that my family is anywhere from 19 to 73% more likely to not be able to attend church. And I think that we would all agree that the Bible is clear that everyone needs the gospel and that everyone includes people with disabilities. But let's also keep in mind the ones that we cannot see. So I'd like you to consider this question. Are you willing to help change these numbers? And I think you are. You're here today. Are you willing to do the work? You see the data. Are you really willing to do the work to help families like mine have a better chance of attending church? If your answer is yes, thank you. I need church just as much as the next person. And with everything that happens in my house, I need Jesus, not just on a daily basis, but a minute by minute basis. So to think that my family could not attend church between 19% and 73% is frightening, because I don't know what I would do without the Lord. So again, if your answer is yes, thank you. I'm going to show you a few super quick things that you can do to help make that happen. And if your answer is no, we'll pray for you. We can best love those who are affected by disabilities that we cannot see by having more than just one model of disability ministry. We need more than a self-contained classroom, because it is important to see all people as image bearers, not just those that fall into a certain category of care. My son wouldn't need a self-contained classroom, but he might need a few accommodations at your church. So I get that invisible disabilities are, in fact, invisible. So how are you supposed to know if Katie doesn't return emails because of her PTSD, ADHD, anxiety, or if it's just because Katie's flaky? How can you accommodate her if you don't know? And so here's one simple tool I'd like to start off with. One way that you can get a better inventory of your church's needs is by sending out a survey. The survey can be simple. We as the church like to send out a lot of emails anyway, so it should be easy. But just send out a simple survey that says, hey, our church is trying to be more disability friendly. We're trying to better serve our people and our communities that have disabilities. Is there any way we can better accommodate you here? And I would follow that up with examples. One really cool, simple example I've heard about recently from a church that I got to work with is they asked, could anyone benefit from gluten-free communion? And at first I kind of thought it was kind of funny, but then I thought about it. There are people in the body of Christ that can't participate in communion because they have celiac disease, and how simple of a change that would be to accommodate them. And you might be thinking, we've heard these stats from other speakers, we don't have anyone with a disability in our church. But if 1 in 5 has a disability, then I'm willing to bet that there are people in your church too. Also, families like mine, you just heard this from our last speaker, we've either been taught that we're a burden, or that we should just keep our mouth shut or not attend church. So we're certainly not going to come up to you and announce all of our struggles. Another way to serve individuals and families affected by disability is to simply be slow to judge. Instead of judging the family that comes 10 minutes late and misses worship and leaves 10 minutes early to avoid the crowd at the end, consider maybe they're doing that because they have sensory overload. Another way to serve these families and individuals is to preach the biblical truth with compassion. Talk to your pastors about setting the example by addressing things as a congregation. You can do this a couple of different ways. One way is to maybe set aside an entire Sunday where you have a disability Sunday and you preach this biblical truth from the stage. There was a recent study done. I don't have it stated up there, but I'd be happy to give it to you after if you want to chat. But the study was this, and I had to read it twice to fully understand this. 1 in 4 church members either wasn't sure or disagreed with this following statement: people with disabilities are created in the image of God. So let me read that again. 1 in 4 either don't know their answer or they disagree that people with disabilities are made in the image of God. I think this is because the church, we're not doing a good job. We're not doing a good job at addressing this from the pulpit. How can followers of Christ believe biblical truth regarding disability if we're not teaching it to them? And how can families like mine that are impacted by disability know that we're wanted in your church if you're not saying it? My last suggestion on how we can better love our brothers and sisters with invisible disabilities is to just start removing barriers. And those might be the physical ones. But I also want you to consider the things like congregational attitudes or your website. Does your website say that you can accommodate people with disabilities? Is it known that I can contact the kids or the student director so I can let you know about my son's needs? And finally, I'd like to leave you with one last piece of information. I'm sorry, I'm awful at the slides. I also hate public speaking, so I left that part out of the fun fact. But a good pastor, a friend of mine, he's the one who actually convinced me to apply for a TED Talk. He said whenever he does any sort of public speaking, whether it's preaching or another engagement, he always asks himself these three questions. And the questions are, what do I want the audience to feel? What do I want my audience to know? And what do I want my audience to do as a result of what they've just heard? And so as a former special educator, I was taught to give clear, explicit, obvious answers, and old habits die hard. So I'm going to do that for you guys. What do I want you to feel? I want you to feel a godly compassion for those that have invisible disabilities and their families. And not a charitable sort of feeling sorry for, but a compassion that brings change. My husband actually preached about this recently, and he used this term that psychologists call cognitive empathy. We're not asking for cognitive empathy. Oh, that's a nice thing. Oh, I feel bad for Katie's family, and then we move on. I want you guys to feel a biblical, godly compassion for people that are impacted by disability. What do I want you to learn from this? I want you to learn that we are called to consider individuals of all disabilities as image bearers. And what do I want you to do now that you've heard this? I want you to be able to confidently answer this question. What am I going to choose to do differently at my church now for people with disabilities, including those that we cannot see? Thank you for your time.